Well, gentlemen, thank you for a terrific start to this debate. The time has now come to involve you, the audience, here at Roy Thompson Hall. Those written questions have been coming in, and some have been passed on to me and our folks in the control room. Also, we're going to bring on our online audience through questions that have been debated on our discussion boards, and I'm going to take some live questions from some younger audience members here on the stage. And in that regard, Christopher, we're going to start with a question from you. It's a young woman right here who would like to address you personally. Tell the audience your name and your question, please.
Hi, my name is Megha Wadhwani.
Just hold on a sec. We're going to get this microphone working.
Okay.
Is this microphone working? Try again.
Hello?
You got it.
Okay. My name is Megha Wadhwani. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Toronto. And my question is actually in regards to globalization. This century, globalization will bring together, as never before, nations and peoples divided by wealth, geography, politics, and race. So my question is, instead of fearing faith, why not embrace the shared values of the world's major religions as a way of uniting humankind?
Great question. Christopher?
Yeah. Well,
unity out of faith? Or disunity?
Perfectly good question, but seemed to be phrased as a call for common humanism. I mean, I didn't hear anyone say, wouldn't it be better if everyone at least joined some church or other? Not a bit of it. I mean, common humanism is, I think, not made particularly easier by the practice of religion, and I'll tell you why. There's something about religion that is, very often at any rate, and in its original monotheistic Judaistic form, actually is ab initio an expression of exclusivism. This is our God. This is the God who's made a covenant with our tribe. You find it all over the place. It isn't always as sectarian as fundamentalist Judaism was, and sometimes still is, but it's not unknown. I mean, it's always struck me as slightly absurd to be a special church for English people, though I can sort of see the point. It strikes me as positively sinister that Pope Benedict should want to restore the Catholic Church to the claim it used to make, which is that it is the one true church, and that all other forms of Christianity are, as he still puts it, defective and inadequate. How this helps to build your future world of cooperation and understanding is not known to me. If you tell me in the Balkans what your religion is, I can tell you what your nationality is. You're not a Catholic. You know less about Loyola than I do. But I know you're a Croat, and I know you're a Croat nationalist. It's a religion, and in fact any form of faith, because it is a surrender of reason, it's a surrender of reason in favor of faith, is a fantastic force multiplier, a tremendous intensifier, I was trying to say, of all things that are in fact divisive rather than inclusive. And that's why its history is so stained with blood, not just of crimes against humanity, crimes against womanhood, crimes against reason and science, attacks upon medicine and enlightenment, all these appalling things that Tony kept defending himself from that I didn't even have time to bring up. But if you just look at the way the Christians love each other in the wars of religion in Lebanon, or in former Yugoslavia, you will see that there is no conceivable way that by calling on the supernatural, you will achieve anything like your objective of a common humanism, which is, I think you're quite right to say, our only chance of, I won't call it salvation. Thank you.
Now, Tony, what I'd like you to do, there's another question on the stage. Someone, in a sense, has the inverse question for you, and it'd be a great opportunity for you to respond to Heytshins at the same time. So let me go to Emily Padden, a Trudeau scholar at Oxford University, who has a question for you, Mr. Blair.
Thank you very much. My research is in armed conflict in sub-Saharan Africa, and so the question I'd like to ask you, Mr. Blair, if I may, is how do you argue that religion is a force for good in the world when the same faiths that bind peoples and groups also deepen divisions and exacerbate conflict?
Great question.
To which my answer is that they can do, and there are very many examples of that. But there are also examples, let me give you one from the Northern Ireland peace process, where in the end actually people from Protestant Catholic churches got together And actually the religious leaders of those two churches tried to bring about a situation where people reached out across the faith divide. And so what I would say to you is that this exclusivism is not, you know, this type of excluding other people because they're different. Let's just nail the myth that this is solely the prerogative of religion. I'm afraid this happens in many, many different walks of life. It's not what true religion is about. True religion is not about excluding somebody because they're different. True religion is actually about embracing someone who is different. That is why, you know, in every major religion, this concept of love of neighbor, and Christopher's absolutely right. Confucius did indeed say exactly something similar to Rabbi Hillel. Of course, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. If you look at Hinduism, Buddhism, the religion of Islam, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam was actually at the forefront of science, was at the forefront of introducing proper rights for women for the first time in that part of the world. So the point is this, and this is really where the debate comes to. Christopher says, well, humanism is enough. And what I say to that is, but for some people of faith, it isn't enough. They actually believe that there is indeed a different and higher power simply than humanity. And that is not about them thinking of heaven and hell in some sort of old-fashioned sense of trying to terrorize people into submission to religion. They actually think of it as about how you fulfill your purpose as a human being in the service of others. And so, you know, when we say, well, that could be done by humanism, yes, it could. But the fact is, for many people, it's driven by faith. And so, yes, it's true, you can find examples of where religion has deepened the divide in countries in sub-Saharan Africa. You can also find examples of where religion has tried to overcome those divides by preaching what is the true message of religion, which is one of human compassion and love.
Heytshins, let's have you come back on that, because not just Northern Ireland, but Iraq, a war that you supported, religion played an important role, arguably, in the success of putting together post-invasion Iraq.
If I only think we should do this because the two questions were in effect the same and both very well phrased. And because I never like to miss out a chance to congratulate someone on being humorous, if only unintentionally. It's very touching for Tony to say that he recently went to a meeting that bridged a religious divide in Northern Ireland. Well, where does the religious divide come from? 400 years and more, 400 years more in my own country of birth, of people killing each other's children, depending on what kind of Christian they were, and sending each other's children in rhetoric to hell, and making Northern Ireland the place the most remarkable in Northern Europe for unemployment, for ignorance, for poverty, and for, I would say, stupidity too. And for them now to say, maybe we might consider breaching this gap, well, I should bloody well think so. But I don't see how. What if they'd listened to the atheist community in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and if they'd listened to the secular movement in Northern Ireland, which is a real thing, and I know many people who suffer dreadfully from membership in it, not excluding being pulled out of a car by a man in a balaclava and asked, are you Catholic or Protestant? He said, I'm Jewish atheist, actually. He said, what are you, a Protestant Jewish atheist or a Catholic? You laugh. You laugh, but it's not so funny when the party of God has a gun in your ear at the same time. And that was in Britain, and still is to some extent, until recently. Rwanda. Do I say that there would be no quarrel between Hutu and Tutsi, people in Rwanda? Belgian colonialism, I think, made it worse, probably, but there are no doubt innate ethnic differences, or there felt to be in Rwanda. But the fact of the matter is, Rwanda is the most Christian country in Africa. In fact, by one account, that's to say numbers of people in relation to numbers of churches, it's the most Christian country in the world. And the Hutu power genocide, at any rate, was preached from the pulpits, actually the pulpits of the Catholic Church, as many of the people we are still looking for, wanted in that genocide, are hiding in the Vatican, along with a number of other people who should be given up to international justice, by the way. Quite a number of people. So, since Tony seems to like religious people best when they're largely non-practicing, but just basically faithful, I'll grant him that much. I say that it's not entirely the fault of religion that this happened in Rwanda, but when it's preached from the pulpit, as it was in Northern Ireland and in Rwanda, it does tend to make it very, very much worse. Thank you.
Tony, just briefly come back on that, because you were intimately involved in the search for peace in Northern Ireland, and I assume you had a very different perspective of the role that faith played in the resolution of that conflict.
Yeah, and I work now, do work in Rwanda. Look, first of all, I think it really would be bizarre to say that the conflict in Rwanda was the result of the Catholic Church. I mean, Rwanda is a perfect indicator of what I'm saying, which is you can put aside religion and still have the most terrible things happen. I mean, this was the worst genocide since the Holocaust. It was committed on a tribal basis. Yes, it's true, there were members of the Catholic Church who behaved badly in that context of Rwanda. There were also, by the way, members of the Catholic Church and others of religious denomination who stood up and protected and died alongside people in Rwanda. So, you know, and as for Northern Ireland, yes, of course, Protestant and Catholic, absolutely right, but you couldn't ignore the politics of the situation in Northern Ireland. It was to do with the relationship between Britain and Ireland going back over many, many centuries. So my point is very simple. Of course, religion has played a role, and sometimes a very bad role, in these situations, but not only religion. Yeah. And what is at the heart of this is we wouldn't dream of condemning all of politics, because politics had led to Hitler or Stalin, or indeed what has happened in Rwanda. So let us not condemn the whole of religion, or say that religion, when you look at it as a whole, is a force for bad, because there are examples of where religion has had that impact. And so I think actually Rwanda and Northern Ireland are classic examples, even the Middle East peace process. I mean, yes, I agree, you can look at all the religious issues there, but let's not ignore the political issues either. And frankly, at the moment, the reason, and I can tell you this from first-hand, but I can tell you from first-hand experience, the reason we don't have an agreement at the moment between Palestinians and Israelis is not to do with the religious leaders on either side, right? It's a lot more to do with the political leaders, so it's my branch that has to take the blame for that. And therefore, what I would say is, I actually think that yes, of course, a lot of these conflicts have religious roots. I actually think it's possible for religious leaders to play a positive part in trying to resolve those. But in the end, it's for politics and religion to try and work out a way in which religion, in a world of globalization that is pushing people together, can play a positive rather than negative role. And if we concentrated on that, rather than trying to drive religion out, which is futile, but concentrate instead on how we actually get people of different faiths working together, learning from each other and living with each other, I think it would be a more productive mission. Thank you.
Okay, let's question. We like the applauding, so please continue that throughout the debate. Let's take a written question. My producers are telling me that we have a written question. We'll get that on the screen. And Christopher, this is for you to start with. Interesting one. America is both one of the most religious countries in the world and also one of the most democratic and pluralistic, both now and arguably through much of its history. How do you explain that seeming paradox?
Relatively simply, the United States has uniquely a constitution that forbids the government to take sides in any religious matter, or to sponsor the church, or to adopt any form of faith itself. As a result of which, anyone who wants to practice their religion in America has to do it as a volunteer. It's what de Tocqueville wrote about so well in his Democracy in America. Ever since Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, during his tenure as president, saying, you'll be familiar with the phrase, I'm sure, rest assured, because they'd written to him out of their fear of persecution in Connecticut, rest assured that there will ever be a wall of separation between the church and the state in this country. The maintenance of that wall, which people like me have to defend every day against those who want garbage taught in schools and pseudoscience in the name of Christ, and other atrocities. The maintenance of that wall is the guarantee of the democracy. By the way, for a bonus, can anyone tell me who the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut thought was persecuting them? The Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut. Well done. Also, that argues, by the way, for the existence of a very small but real fan base of mine somewhere in this hall. Yes, now, it doesn't seem to matter very much now, but it mattered then. Give those Congregationalists enough power, as they did have in Connecticut. Just you see how unfurry they look compared to how docile they behave now we've disciplined them. Thank you.
Well, Tony, let me come to you with that same question. Is it just a case of American exceptionalism, or is this balance between pluralism and faith that's been achieved in America something that you're either seeing in other parts of the world or a model that could be exported globally?
Well, I think that what most people want to see is a situation where people of faith are able to speak in the public sphere but are not able to dictate. And that is a reasonable balance, and I think that most people would accept. But I think, again, what I would say about examples of where you get religious people that are fanatical in the views that they want to press on others. Fanaticism is not, as I say, it's not a wholly owned subsidiary of religion, I'm afraid. It can happen outside of religion too. So the question is, how do people of if you like, good faith, who believe in pluralist democracy, how do we ensure that people who hold faith deeply are able to participate in society and have the same ability to do that as everyone else without being kind of denigrated, but at the same time have to respect the fact that ultimately democracy is about the will of the people and the will of the people as a whole. So I think that most people can get that balance right, and we are very lucky actually in our countries, because we are in a situation where people of different faiths are free to practice their faith as they like. And that is, in my view, an absolutely fundamental part of democracy. And it's something that people of religious faith have to be very clear about and stand up and do. And one of the reasons why, for me, I think it's actually important for people of religious faith to have people like Christopher challenge us and say, okay, this is how we see religion. Now you get out there and tell us how it's different, and where it isn't different, how you're going to make it so. And I think that's a positive and good thing. All I ask for is that where people of faith are speaking in the public sphere, then people accept that we have a right to do that, and that sometimes we do that actually because we believe in the things that we're saying, and we're not trying to subvert or change democracy. On the contrary, we simply want to be part of it, and our voice is a voice that has a right to be heard alongside the voice of others.
Well, I see Christopher writing furiously, so I'm going to ask him to come back on that point.
Well, I hadn't anything special to add there. I think I'd rather give another person a chance for a question.
Okay. Well, it's a question that was debated for you, Christopher, on monkdebates.com in the lead-up to this evening. On our discussion board, many people saying that religion provides a sense of community in modern societies where immersed in a consumer culture, more often than not living alongside fellow citizens who are more maybe self-directed than other-directed. What do you say about the pure community function of religion? Isn't that a public good, a valid public good of religious belief?
Absolutely. I say good luck to it. The way I phrase it in my book, it's available at fine bookstores everywhere, is that I propose a pact with the faithful. Say, I'll take it again, I'll quote from the great Thomas Jefferson. I don't mind if my neighbor believes in 15 gods or in none. He neither by that breaks my leg or picks my pocket. I would echo that and say that as long as you don't want your religion taught to my children in school, given a government subsidy, imposed on me by violence, any of these things, you are fine by me. I would prefer... I would prefer not even to know what it is that you do in that church of yours. In fact, if you force it on my attention, I will consider it a breach of that pact. Have your own bloody Christmas and so on. Do your slaughtering, if possible, in an abattoir, and don't mutilate the genitals of your children. Because then I'm afraid it gets within the ambit of law. All right, so don't you think that's reasonably pluralistic and communitarian of me? I think it is. Why is it a vain hope on my part? Why is that? Has this pact ever been honoured by the other side? Of course not. And it's a mystery to me, and I'll share it with you. If I believed that there was a saviour who'd been appointed or sent by, or a prophet, appointed or sent by a God who bore me in mind and loved me and wanted the best for me, if I believed that, and that I possessed the means of grace and the hope of glory, to phrase it like that, I don't know, I think I might be happy. They say it's the way to happiness. Why doesn't it make them happy? Well, don't you think it's a perfectly decent question? Why doesn't it? Because they won't be happy till you believe it too. And why is that? Because that's what their holy books tell them. Now, I'm sorry, it's enough with saying in the name of religion. Do these texts say that until every knee bows at the name of Jesus and so on, there will be no happiness? Of course it is what they say. It isn't just a private belief. It is rather, and I think always has been, and it's why I'm here, actually a threat to the idea of a peaceable community. And very often, as now, and frequently, a very palpable one. So I think that's the underlying energy that powers the friendly disagreement between Tony and myself.
Tony, would you like to come back on that topic of religion and community, or move on to another question? Let's move on. Also on our website, big discussion around the topic of religion and its role in the invasion of Iraq. And Mr. Bleyr, the question is for you, and it's about something that many people posted about, something you said once about the interplay of religion and politics. And to quote you directly, you said, "What faith can do is not tell you what is right, but give you the strength to do it." The question being, what role did faith play in your most important decision as Prime Minister, the invasion of Iraq?
I think we can nail this one pretty easily. It was not about religious faith. And, you know, one of the things that I sometimes say to people is look, the thing about religion and religious faith is if you're a person of faith, it's part of your character, it defines you in many ways as a human being. It doesn't do the policy answers, I'm afraid. Okay? So as I used to say to people, you know, you don't go into church and look heavenward and say to God, right, next year the minimum wage, is it £6.50 or £7? Unfortunately, it doesn't tell you the answer. And even on the major decisions that are to do with war and peace that I've taken, they were decisions based on policy, and so they should be, and you may disagree with those decisions, but they were taken because I genuinely believe them to be right.
So Christopher, the natural follow-on question to you is, how did you square the circle, or maybe you didn't, between your support for the Iraq War and, let's say, the current then President, George W. Bush, and his very public evocation of faith in terms of his rhetoric around the invasion?
Well, I don't remember. In fact, I don't think you can point out to me any moment where George Bush said he was under divine order or had any divine warrant for the intervention in Iraq. In fact, I'm perfectly certain that he might not have minded at some points giving that impression, but he wanted to give that impression about everything that he did. George Bush is someone who, as with his immediate predecessor, after various experiments in faith, ended up in his wife's church, most comfortable place for him to be. She's after all is the one who said to him, "If you take another drink, you scumbag, I'm leaving and taking the kids," which is his way of saying he found Jesus and gave up the bottle. We know this. We know this to be true. Now, like a good Methodist, I was in Methodist school for many years myself. Like a good Methodist, George Bush says the following: "I've done all I can with this argument and with this conflict. From now on, all is in God's hands." That's quite different, I think. Would have made him a perfectly good Muslim, as a matter of fact. Combination of fatalism with a slightly sinister feeling of being chosen. Anyway. No, what's striking most to the eye of those who observe the debate on what Tony Blair and I agree to call the liberation of Iraq is the unanimous opposition of the leadership of every single Christian church to it, including the President's own and now the Prime Minister's own. The Methodist Church in the United States adamantly opposed, the Vatican adamantly opposed, as it had been to the liberation of Kuwait in 1991. Not the first time in the world that a sort of sickly Christian passivity has been preached in the face of fascist dictatorship. And of course, I was very surprised by the number of liberal Jews who took the same about a regime that harbored genocidal thoughts towards them. And if it comes to that, but I'm not the arbiter of what's rational in the mind of the religious thinker, given the number of Muslims put to the sword by Saddam Hussein's regime, quite extraordinary to see the extent to which Muslim fundamentalists flock to his defense. But I don't expect integrity or consistency from those quarters. But those of us who worked with people, with Iraqi intellectuals like Kanan Makir, with the Kurdish leadership, the secular left opposition of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the Iraqi Communist Party, I have to give it credit for this, many feminists and other secular who'd worked for years to bring down Saddam Hussein, are very proud of our solidarity with those comrades, those brothers and sisters. We're still in touch with them. We have nothing to apologize for. It's those who would have kept a cannibal and a Caligula and a professional sadist in power who have the explaining to do. Thank you.
Well, I want to be conscious of our time and go to our two final on-stage questions, and I believe the first one is for Mr. Blair, a student at the Monk School of Global Affairs. Introduce yourself and ask your question to Mr. Blair.
Yes, good evening. My name is Jonah Cantor, and my question pertains to something that's come up earlier this evening. Religion on both sides is often seen as an obstacle to peace in the Middle East, and I was wondering what role you believe faith can play in a positive manner in helping to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
Well, I remember a few months back I was in Jericho, and when you go out from Jericho, they took me up to. We went to visit the Mount of Temptation, which is where I think they take all the politicians. And the guide that was showing us around, the Palestinian guide, he suddenly stopped at one point and he said, "This part of the world," he said, "Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, why did they all have to come here?" And I sort of said, "Well, supposing they hadn't, would everything be fine?" And he said, "Oh, probably not." But you know, the religious leadership can play a part in this. For example, I don't think you will get a resolution of the issue of Jerusalem unless, which is a sacred and holy city to all three Abrahamic faiths, unless people of faith are prepared to try and find common ground so that they are entitled to worship in the way that they wish. And it's correct that in both Israel and Palestine you see examples of religious fundamentalism and people espousing and doing extreme things as a result of their religion. But I can also tell you that there are rabbis and people of the Muslim faith on the Palestinian side who are desperately trying to find common ground and ways of working together. And I think, you know, part of the issue, and the reason indeed for me starting my faith foundation, is that we can argue forever the degree to which what is happening in the Middle East is a result of religion or the result of politics. But one thing is absolutely clear, that without those religious faith playing a positive and constructive role, it's going to be very difficult to reach peace. So my view, again, and I think this is in a sense one of the debates that underlies everything we've been saying this evening, is if it is correct that you're not going to simply eliminate religion, you know, you're not going to drive religion out of the world, then let's work on how we make those people of different faiths, even though they believe that their own faith is the path that they believe to salvation, how they can work across the faith divide in order to produce respect and understanding and tolerance. Because believe it or not, amongst all the examples of prejudice and bigotry that Christopher quite rightly draws attention to, there are also examples of people of deep religious faith, Jewish, Muslim and Christian, who are desperately trying to search for peace, and with the right political will supporting that, who would play a major part in achieving peace. So I agree, religion has to one degree created these problems, but actually people of different religious faiths working together can also be an important part of resolving these problems. And that's what we should do, and it's what we can do, and in respect of Jerusalem, it is absolutely imperative that we do.
Visitor goes to the Western Wall. Anything he can do. Visitor goes to the Western Wall, sees a man tearing at his beard, banging his head on the wall, shoving messages into it at the rate of knots, wailing and flailing, watches with fascination. When the guy finally breaks off, he says, "Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing you were being unusually devout in your addresses to the wall, to the divines. Do you mind if I asked you what you were praying for?" He said, "I was praying that there should be peace, that there should be mutual love and respect between all the peoples in this area." And said, "And what do you think?" says the visitor. I said, "Well, it's like talking to the wall." But there are people who think talking to walls is actually a form of divine worship in this book. And it's another instance, and not that I didn't bring it out laboriously myself, but I don't mind it again, of the difference between Tony and myself when he says, he uses his giveaway phrase, "in the name of religion," rather than as a direct consequence of scriptural authority, which is what I mean when I talk about this. No one's going to deny, are they? No one is going to deny there are awards of real estate made in the Bible by none other than Jehovah himself. That land is promised to human primates over other human primates in response to a divine covenant. Do excuse me. Sorry, this sometimes happens. No, that can't be denied. When David Ben-Gurion was prime minister of what he still called a secular state, he called in Yigal Yadin and Finkelstein and the other Israeli archaeologists, professional guys, and said, "Go out into the desert and dig up the title deeds to our state. You'll find our legit." That was the instruction to the Department of Archaeology. They went, after they conquered Sinai and West Bank, they went even further afield, looking for some evidence Moses had ever been there. They didn't find any because there never has been and there never will be any. But you cannot say that the foundational cause, casus belli in this region, the idea that God intervenes in real estate and territorial disputes, isn't inscribed in the text itself. And not only in the Jewish text, but thanks to a foolish decision taken in the early Christian centuries, where it was decided not to dump the New Testament, but and to start again just with the Nazarene story. Great Christian theologians like Marcion were in favor of doing that. Why do we want to bring the darkness and tyranny and terror and death and blood and cultism of the first books along with us? Surely we should start again. No, we're saddling ourselves with all that. So this is a responsibility for the Christian world too. And need I add that there is no good Muslim who does not say that Allah tells us we can never give up an inch of Muslim land, and that once our mosques are built, there can be no retreat. It would be a betrayal. It would lead you straight to hell. In other words, yes, they gibber and jabber, all of them, the three religions. Yeah, you're quite right. God awards land. It's just you've got the wrong title. No. This is what I mean when I say the religion is a real danger to the survival of civilization, and that it makes this banal regional national dispute, which if reduced to its real proportions is a nothingness, if it makes that not just lethally insoluble, but is drawing in other contending parties who really openly wish, for an apocalyptic conclusion to it, as also bodied forth in the same scriptural texts. In other words, that it will be the death of us all, the end of humanity, the end of the world, the end of the whole suffering vale of tears, which is what they secretly want. This is a failure of the parties of God, and it's not something that happens because people misinterpret the texts. It's because they believe in them. That's the problem. Thank you.
Tony, would you like a quick rejoinder, or can I move on to our final question for this session?
If you like.
Well, great. We have I think, the perfect final question. And it's from another student at the Monk School for Global Affairs, Dana Wagner. Where are you, Dana? Here you are.
A big part of this issue is our inability to stand in another's shoes with an open mind to understand a different worldview. In this regard, can each of you tell us which of your opponent's arguments is the most convincing? Thank you.
Right. Now, this definitely never happened in the House of Commons. I think that the most convincing argument is, and the argument that people of faith have got to deal with, is actually the argument that Christopher's just made, which is that the bad that is done in the name of religion is intrinsically grounded in the scripture of religion. Right? That is the single most difficult argument. And since I've said it's a really difficult argument, I suppose I better give an answer to it. My answer to it is this, that there is, of course, that debate that goes on within religion, which is the degree to which, as it were, you look at scripture abstracted from its time, you pick out individual parts of it, you use those in order to justify whatever view you like, or whether, as I tried to do in my opening, you actually say, well, what is the essence of that faith? And what is the essence of scripture? And of course, then what you realize is that, yes, of course, if you believe as a Muslim that we should live our lives according to the 7th century, then you will end up with some very extreme positions. But actually, there are masses of Muslims who completely reject that as a view of Islam, and instead say, no, of course, the Prophet back then was somebody who brought order and stability, and actually, for example, even though we today would want equality for women, and many, again, despite what people say, many Muslims would agree with that as well, and many Muslim women, obviously, back then, actually, what he did was extraordinary for that time. And also, when you look at Christianity, yes, of course, you can point to issues that, of that time, now seem very strange and outdated. But on the other hand, when you take Christianity as a whole and ask what it means to those, what draws people to it, what is it that made me as a student come to Christianity? It wasn't to do with some of the things that Christopher's just been describing, and I understand there are those traditions within religion. I understand that, I accept that. I see how people look at certain parts of scripture and draw those conclusions from it, but it's not what it means to me. It's not the essence of it. The essence of it is through the life of Jesus Christ, is a life of love and selflessness and sacrifice. And that's what it means to me. And so I think the most difficult thing for people of faith is to be able to explain Scripture in a way that makes sense to people in the modern world. And one of the things that we have actually begun recently is a dialogue called The Common Word, which is about Muslims and Christians trying to come together and through Scripture find a common basis of cooperation and mutual respect. So, you know, yes, it is a difficult argument. That is the most difficult argument. I agree. But I also think there is an answer to it. And I think one of the values, actually, of having a debate like this, and in a sense having someone making that point as powerfully as Christopher has made it, is that it does force people of faith to recognize that we have to deal with this argument, to take it on, and to make sure that not just in what we are trying to do, but in how we interpret our faith, we are making sure that what I describe as the essence of faith, which is serving God through the love of others, is indeed reflected not just in what we do, but in the doctrines and the practice of our religion.
Admirable question. Thank you for it. The remark Tony made that I most agreed with this evening, I'll just hope that doesn't sound too minimal, was when he said that if religion was to disappear, things would by no means, as it were, automatically be okay. I mean, he phrased it better than that. But it would be what I regard as a necessary condition, would certainly not be a sufficient one. And anyway, religion won't disappear. I just think the hold of it on people's minds can be substantially broken and domesticated. He's quite right about that, of course. I hope I didn't seem at any point to have argued to the contrary. I come before you, after all, as a materialist. If we give up religion, we discover what actually we know already, whether we're religious or not, which is that we are somewhat imperfectly evolved primates on a very small planet in a very unimportant suburb of a solar system that is itself a negligible part of a very rapidly expanding and blowing apart cosmic phenomena. These conclusions, to me, are a great deal more awe-inspiring than what's contained in any burning bush or horse that flies overnight to Jerusalem or any other of that. It's a great deal more awe-inspiring, as is any look through the Hubble telescope at what our real nature and future really is. So he was quite right to say that, and I would have been entirely wrong if I'd implied otherwise. I think I could say a couple of things for religion myself, would in fact. First is what I call the apotropaic. We all have it, the desire not to be found claiming all the credit. A certain kind of modesty, you could almost say humility. People will therefore say they'll thank God when something happens that they're grateful for. Or there's no need to make this a religious thing. The Greeks had the concept of hubris as something to be avoided and criticized. But what the Greeks would also have called the apotropaic, the view that not all the glory can be claimed by a load of primates like ourselves, is a healthy reminder too. Second, the sense that there's something beyond the material, or if not beyond it, not entirely consistent materially with it, is, I think, a very important matter. What you could call the numinous, or the transcendent, or at its best, I suppose, the ecstatic. I wouldn't trust anyone in this hall who didn't know what I was talking about. We know what we mean by it when we think about certain kinds of music, perhaps. Certainly the relationship, or the coincidence, but sometimes very powerful, between music and love. Landscape, certain kinds of artistic and creative work that appears not to have been done entirely by hand. Without this, we really would merely be primates. I think it's very important to appreciate the finesse of that, and I think religion has done a very good job in enshrining it in music and in architecture, not so much in painting, in my opinion. And I think it's actually very important that we learn to distinguish the numinous in this way. I wrote a book about the Parthenon. I'll mention it briefly. I couldn't live without the Parthenon. I don't believe any civilized person could. If it was to be destroyed, you'd feel something much worse than the destruction of the first temple had occurred, it seems to me. But, we've lost an enormous amount besides by way of our knowledge of symmetry and grace and harmony. But I don't care about the cult of Pallas Athena. It's gone. And as far as I know, it's not to be missed. The Eleusinian mysteries have been demystified. The sacrifices, some of them human, that were made to those gods are regrettable but have been blotted out and forgotten. And Athenian imperialism is also a thing of the past. What remains is the fantastic beauty and the faith that built it. The question is, well, how to keep what is of value of this sort in art and in our own emotions and in our finer feelings. The numinous, the transcendent, I'll go as far as the ecstatic, and to distinguish it precisely from superstition and the supernatural, which are designed to make us fearful and afraid and servile, and which sometimes succeed only too well. Thank you.
Well, it's now time for the final act in our debate, closing statements. We'll do that in the reverse order of our opening remarks. So, Christopher, I'm going to call on you again to speak. Your closing remarks, please.
I'm not ready.
Okay.
I didn't know it was coming. And Tony, what do you say? Would you rather have another question? There's so many people who've got them.
I'm happy
I'd rather answer another question.
Let's take another question. Okay.
In other words, don't run away with the idea I'd run out of stuff, okay? Yes, I'd rather be provoked. Someone could do that.
Sure.
Well, let's do that. And I guess we'll give Christopher a pause here, a chance to drink and catch his breath. And Tony, go to you on this, the whole question of, which has been at the center of this debate, on the rigidity or flexibility of religious doctrine. Your church, the Catholic Church, has just made a reversal of sorts on its policy around the use of condoms, allowed explicitly and only for the prevention of HIV/AIDS infection. Is that a positive? Is that an expression of flexibility, or a critique of the decades of rigidity before this reversal?
Well, I welcome it. But you know, I mean, I'm one of the, I think, billion lay Catholics. So I don't, and I think many Catholics have different views on a whole range of issues upon which there is teaching by the Church. I just wanted to pick up something, if I might, that Christopher said, because I thought his discussion of the transcendent was very interesting, actually. I mean, for those of us of religious faith, we acknowledge and believe that there is a power higher and separate from human power. And in a way, what Christopher is saying is, well, I can't accept that, but I do accept there is something transcendent in the human experience, and something numinous, something even ecstatic. You see, for me, the belief in a higher power and the fact that we should be obedient to the will of that power, not simply our own will, I don't regard that as putting me in a position of servility. Is not the word I would use. I would use the word obligation. And you know, it is of course absolutely true that when I can point to any of the acts that I say are inspired by religious faith, you can say, well, they could easily have been inspired by humanism. But I think that for those of us that are of faith and do believe that there is something actually more than simply the human power, this does give you, I think, a humility. It's not all that can give you a humility, but it does. I think, and I have witnessed this myself, I remember, actually again to refer to Northern Ireland, when I met some of the people who were the relatives of those who died in the Omagh bombing, which came actually after the Good Friday Agreement and was the worst terrorist attack in the history of Northern Ireland. And I went to visit the relatives of the victims, and I remember a man saying to me that who had lost his loved one in the bombing, saying to me, you know, I have prayed about this, and I want you to know that this terrible act should make you all the more determined to reach peace and to not stop your quest for peace. And it is completely true that, of course, he could have come to such an extraordinary, and I would say transcendent view of forgiveness and compassion without religious faith. But it was what led him to that. And so I think you can't ignore the fact that for many of us, actually religious faith is what shapes us in this direction. And not because we are servile or base our religious faith on superstition or contrary to reason, indeed. Which is why I've never seen a contradiction between Darwin and being someone of religious faith. But we do genuinely believe that it impels us in a way that is different and more imperative, in a sense, than anything else in our lives. And, you know, in a way we wouldn't be being true to ourselves unless we admitted that. So that doesn't mean to say that someone who is of no religious faith couldn't be just as good a person, and that is, I do not claim for an instant that anybody who is of religious faith is in some way a superior or better person than someone who isn't. But I do say that religion can and does, in the lives of millions, actually hundreds of millions, in fact billions of people, does give them an impulse to be better people than otherwise they would be.
We'd ask for your closing statement. 5 minutes for your closing statement each. Yep.